Okay, so today I want to cover a way to make our elections a little bit more fair without, because obviously we have the Electoral College, right, where the swing states get a huge amount of disproportional favor. Politicians always go to the swing states in order to get their votes, right, because they're the only states that really matter in the elections. And a way of getting around this without having to amend the Constitution, which is extremely difficult to do, is, drum roll, the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. And what is this? Well, the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is an agreement among a group of U.S. states and Washington, D.C. to award all their electoral votes to whichever presidential ticket wins the overall popular vote in the 50 states and the District of Columbia. The compact is designed to ensure that the candidate who receives the most votes nationwide is elected president, and it would come into effect only when it would guarantee that outcome. So, essentially what this means is, so states are allowed to decide how they run their elections and how they assign their electoral votes. So what's allowed to happen is what the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact does is it says every state who agrees to this will assign their state's electoral votes to whoever wins the national popular vote, right? Does that make sense? Whoever wins the nationwide popular vote gets that state's electoral votes if they agree. And that's the main idea of it so far. And it only starts working once it would only come into effect when it would guarantee that outcome. So that means only when you get enough electoral votes, when you get enough states to sign up to it such that their cumulative total of electoral votes would be a majority of the Electoral College in order to win the election. Introduced in 2006, as of August 2025, it was joined by 17 states and the District of Columbia. They have 209 electoral votes, which is 39% of the Electoral College and 77% of the 270 votes needed to give the compact legal force. The idea gained traction among scholars after George W. Bush won the presidential election but lost the popular vote in 2000. The first time the winner of the presidency had lost is 1888, and just as an aside, just imagine if Al Gore had won in 2000. No Iraq War, maybe no recession, who knows. And we would have also started fighting climate change in 2001, because Al Gore would have taken office January 20th, 2001. A lot to think about. Certain legal questions may affect implementation of the compact, and this is something I want to talk about later. This is my only concern with it. Some legal observers believe states have plenary power to appoint electors as prescribed by the compact. Others believe the compact will require congressional consent under the Constitution's compact clause, or that the presidential election process cannot be altered except by a constitutional amendment. So, come on now, don't be slow on me when I'm making the video. Come on, show me the states that signed up to it. Okay, so I don't know what the dark color means though. I like this map though. Hang on. So, as you can see here, I believe green is all these states that have signed up to it, and yellow is probably pending, and then the gray ones have not signed up to it yet. And so you can see the green states are all mostly the blue states, right? The whole West Coast, Minnesota, Illinois, New York, New Jersey, yeah. That's how it goes. And this map is proportional to their electoral votes. Like here's big California with 54 votes. Here's New York, Illinois, New Jersey. You know, the big boys in the Electoral College. I mean, Texas is big too, so is Florida, but they haven't signed up yet. And you can see so right now they have 209 out of the 270 needed to win, so 38.8% of the Electoral College, and there's also 34 pending. So it's honestly kind of close. I mean, look at this graph right here. This is 270, right? And the green is at 209. That's almost most of the way there. And then with these yellow states of what is that? Kansas, Pennsylvania, and South Carolina. Yes, I know my geography. That's another bump up to 34. So that's pretty close to the majority of 270 needed to win. The issue, though, is that of course the blue states are going to sign up because they have the big populations, but the red states probably don't want to sign up because I think right now the electoral college is debatable. I think you could make the case that favors the red states. Additionally, if you're in a swing state, you probably wouldn't want this to work. You probably wouldn't want the popular vote to be what determines the presidential election, because if you're in a swing state, politicians give you so much attention during elections because you're one of the few states that matter, like Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia. The few states that actually determine our elections have a disproportional effect. So they kind of like that. Like that's why politicians always have to talk about fracking. I can't, of course I support fracking because people in Pennsylvania may not like that if you don't support it. So, the frackers in Pennsylvania have such a disproportionate outcome on who becomes president. Let's go into the motivation for why we would want this. So, reasons for the compact include state winner-take-all laws encourage candidates to focus disproportionately on a limited set of swing states, as I just said. Small changes for the popular vote in those states produce large changes in the electoral college. Yeah, absolutely. Why should swing states be the ones who decide our elections? Call me crazy. I think people should decide elections. I think you get the idea. State winner-take-all laws tend to decrease voter turnout in states without close races. Yes. If you're in a very blue or very red state, like if you're a Republican in California, you already know your state's going to vote blue, so it's like your vote doesn't really matter. If you're a Democrat in Wyoming, you already know it's going to be a red state, so your vote doesn't really matter. But with a popular vote, it would. You would still have the same effect on the outcome. The current electoral college system allows the candidate to win the presidency while losing the popular vote, an outcome seen as counter to one person, one vote principle democracy. Yeah. Let's look at just this century. Technically 2000 was the 20th century, but you know what I mean. In 2000, George Bush wins the presidential election, the electoral college, but then he loses it. I know the courts did their whole thing too, but he lost the popular vote is the point. 2016, Trump wins the electoral college but loses the popular vote. And just imagine if those elections had gone the opposite way. And here you can see a record of all the elections in which so here's 2000 and 2016, like I said. Also 1824 when John Quincy Adams won against Andrew Jackson. 1876 when is it Rutherford Hayes? Yep, won against Tilden. 1888 when Harrison won against Cleveland. And yeah, the others. Whether these splits suggest an advantage for one party or another in the electoral college is discussed in suggested partisan advantage below. Yeah, this is actually quite an interesting topic. For a while, I would have said it favored Republicans. Now, I still think it does, but I'm not 100% sure. So, enactment proposals. Political analyst Nate Silver noted in 2014 that all jurisdictions that had adopted the compact at that time were blue states, which is still mostly true, I believe. Colorado became the first purple state to join in March 15, 2019. Nowadays, I think Colorado is kind of a blue state, though. But that's my point. The blue states tend to favor it, the red states don't, and the swing states don't. So it's like we've gotten really close to 270 with this, but it's like until like a big boy state like Texas with its 40 votes could decide it. Until they agree, it probably won't happen. Now here's a very interesting one. Debate over effects. The project has been supported by editorials in newspapers, arguing that the existing system discourages voter turnout and leaves emphasis on only a few states and a few issues, like fracking in Pennsylvania, while a popular election would equalize voting power. Others have argued against it. In an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal called this is Pete DuPont, called it a project an urban power grab. I feel like that's a very interesting choice of language because when you say urban, you mean where people live? Because people live in cities in the surrounding metropolitan areas. So is it an urban power grab, or is it just the people grabbing power away from swing states? Call me crazy, I don't think that's a big deal. In fact, I think it's good. that would shift politics entirely to urban issues, urban and suburban, because more people live in the suburbs than they live in the cities. Look at the New York, Chicago, or LA metropolitan areas, and you'll see more people are in the suburbs than in the actual city itself. It's not just, when we say urban, colloquially, we think of cities, but I mean urban also includes the suburbs too, in a technical sense. A collection of readings pro and con has been assembled by the League of Women Voters. Some of the most common points of the debate are detailed below. So this is a very interesting topic, and this is something I want to do a deep dive into in a later video, protective function of the Electoral College. Certain founders, notably Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, conceived the Electoral College as a deliberative body which would weigh the inputs of states, but not be bound to them. So they would take, the electors would take this, the will of the people and then the electoral votes from the states into consideration, but wouldn't be necessarily bound by them. They could still vote otherwise in selecting the president, and would therefore serve to protect the country from an election of a person who is unfit to be president. So literally, the Electoral College was designed to prevent someone who was unfit to achieve office, and then in 2016, ironically, in a twist of fate, it did just the opposite. Isn't that's one of those, like, just ironies of history, you know? However, the Electoral College has never served such a role in practice, yeah. And honestly, if the people vote for it, regardless of the system to elect people, if the people vote for you, yeah, I mean, like, I don't like the idea of unfaithful electors who vote differently than the way that their state wanted them to. From 1796 onward, presidential electors have acted as rubber stamps for their party's nominees. So it's just like, it's just like an official part of the process. It's not like a thing that they're actually going to do to, like, change their vote. It's just like it's a rubber stamp, you know. It's like a certification thing. Journalist and commentator Pete Beinhart has cited the election of Donald Trump, whom some, he notes, view as unfit, yeah, some, as evidence of that the Electoral College does not perform a protective function. Yeah, well, it sure didn't. As of 2025, no election outcome has been determined by an elector deviating from the will of their state. Furthermore, 32 states and the District of Columbia have laws to prevent such faithless electors, and such laws were upheld by Constitutional Supreme Court. The National Popular Vote interstate does not eliminate the Electoral College or affect faithless electors. It merely changes how electors are pledged to the participating states. And this is what I mean. It merely changes how electors are pledged by participating states. So we still have the Electoral College, but it is sort of a way to bypass it by assigning electoral votes to the winner of the National Popular Vote. So as I said, campaign focus on swing states, I think you get the idea. I think, you know, your vote should matter. And if you're in a blue or red state, you know, I mean, it matters in a variety of different elections, like the local and state elections and all that. But in terms of voting for the president, we kind of already know how a blue or red state is going to vote. It's only the handful of swing states that really matter. Okay. Do I need to go into all this? I don't know. Suggested partisan advantage. I think this is interesting. Some supporters and opponents of the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact believe it gives one party an advantage relative to the current electoral college system. Former Delaware Governor Pete DuPont, again citing him, a Republican, amazing that a Republican would be in charge of Delaware, has argued the compact would be an urban, yeah, I think we already talked about urban power grab, blah, 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 blah. Don't listen to that. However, Saul Anuiz, former chairman of the Michigan Republican Party, wrote that Republicans need the compact, citing that he believes would be to the center-right nature of the American electorate. That's interesting. Center-right nature of the American electorate. Honestly, I think the country, it might be a little bit strange to say, but sometimes the country is a bit more socially conservative than it is economically conservative, because I think right now a lot of people are struggling economically. A lot of people kind of like economic populism, and which is, you know, a left-wing thing, but is the country as a whole center-right? I mean, well, I guess look at Trump now. I mean, it's an interesting thing. An interesting thing to think about at the very least. New Yorker essayist Hendrik Hertzberg concluded that the NPVIC would benefit neither party, which honestly might be the case, noting that historically both Republicans and Democrats have been successful in winning the popular vote in presidential elections. Well, that's true. Winning the popular vote in presidential elections. But I mean, the only times that, it's okay. Honestly, do we even need to consider the 1800s in our analysis right now? Because I think the political landscape is so different. So far, like in In 2000 and 2016, it was a Republican who won the Electoral College but lost the popular vote. So this is why a lot of people will say it benefits Democrats more. And honestly, maybe it will, but honestly, it doesn't matter. It's just the right thing to do because people's votes should matter. Okay, I can talk about this, about how it would affect those states. The thing is, California has the most people, so with a popular vote, California would matter the most, but I believe it also has the most electoral votes as it is, and it might make California a little bit more powerful, but honestly, I don't know. It's like there already were is the thing. How much more I want to read into this. I really do encourage you to read this Wikipedia article on your own. I can't read the whole thing on video because that would take forever. All right, let's just go into this. The constitutionality. There's an ongoing legal debate about the constitutionality of the NPVIC. At issues are interpretations of the Compact Clause of Article 1, Section 10, and states plenary power under Election Clause of Article 2, Section 1. And I will be honest, I'm not like a legal person, so I'm not really an expert enough to say whether this would be considered constitutional. But despite all that, despite whether or not this is actually constitutional, I think it has to be understood that there's constitutionality objectively, and then there's constitutionality in practice, right? What would the current Republican-controlled Supreme Court think about this if a majority of states, such that their electoral college votes were greater than 270, agreed to do this? Would they agree to it just because most of the Supreme Court nominees or not nominees, the Supreme Court justices are conservative? Would they agree to this? The Supreme Court isn't exactly not corrupt anymore. Clarence Sugar Baby Thomas. Okay, so popularity, public support for electoral college reform. That's where I'm almost done with this. Okay, 2007, so it's a little bit dated. Washington Post and Kaiser Family Foundation poll found that 72% favored replacing the electoral college with a direct election. 78% of Democrats and 60% of Republicans and 73% of voters. Well, that's interesting, huh? Okay, I'm gonna take a breath. My voice is starting to run out. A November 2016 Gallup poll found 2016 U.S. presidential election showed that American support for amending the U.S. Constitution to replace the Electoral College, which, by the way, this compact does not require an amendment, but amending it to a popular vote fell to 49%, with 47% opposed. So it's still the plurality favor it. It's just that it's not a majority. Republican support for replacing the Electoral College with a popular vote dropped dramatically, from 54% in 2011 to 19% in 2016, which Gallup attributed to partisan response in the 2016 result, in which Republican candidate Donald Trump won the Electoral College despite losing the popular vote. So yeah, of course, there's always a partisan aspect to it here. Because Trump won, now all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, maybe the Electoral College is actually pretty good. Yeah. That's always going to be a thing. And to be fair, that's going to be a thing on both sides. But I think we also have to realize, regardless of partisanship, maybe it's also just the right thing to do. In March 2018, a Pew Research Center poll showed that 55% of Americans supported replacing the Electoral College with a popular vote, with 41% opposed, but that a partisan divide remained in that support. 75% of self-identified Democrats supported replacing the Electoral College with a popular vote, while only 32% of self-identified Republicans did. A September 2020 Gallup poll showed support for amending the U.S. Constitution to replace the Electoral College, with a national popular vote rose to 61% with 38% opposed, similar to levels prior to the 2016 election. So it's like after people forgot about the fact that Trump won the Electoral College but lost the popular vote, people kind of forgot about that, and now it's kind of fell back to where it was previously. Fell back by, opposition to reforming our elections by having a popular vote fell. So more people still want to change it to a popular vote than want to maintain the Electoral College. Although the partisan divide continued with support from 59% of Democrats and 68% for independents, only 23% of Republicans. An August 2020 Pew Research Center poll showed 63% support for a national popular vote versus 35% opposed, with support from 80% of Democrats and 42% of Republicans. So now in 2022, 80% of Democrats and 42% of Republicans want it. So now it's a minority of Republicans. But I'd be curious to know what independents thought. I'm not going to go into reading more about this. So here's another good chart. You can see Maryland was the great state of Maryland was the first state to implement it, and then it gradually more and more people did. Now we're at 209 out of 270. Okay, I think that about covers that article. So I hope that was a good intro into why I think the replacing the why I think that the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is a good idea, because you can bypass the Electoral College without having to reform the Constitution by still having a national popular vote to decide our elections. Now here's another thing I want to talk about. Another way that we can change things. Here again, and not necessarily change things for anyone's betterment. This is not necessarily partisan. I do think it's an important reform to our system, though, and that's the Wyoming rule. So the Wyoming rule is a proposal to increase the size of the United States House of Representatives so that the standard representative to population ratio would be that of the state with the least population, which is currently Wyoming. Okay, so the way the number of representatives in the House of Representatives is assigned is that you take the state with the lowest population, which is Wyoming, right? However many people they have, that is considered one electoral vote. So if a state has twice of Wyoming's population, they get 2 electoral votes. If they have 3 times Wyoming's population, they get 3 votes, etc. Like 3. Sorry. It's always hard to move the camera because it's kind of reversed. But you get the idea. So you might think that we're using whatever the population of Wyoming is right now to assign our to assign our representatives in the House of Representatives, but no. Let's continue. Under Article 1 of the United States Constitution, each state is guaranteed at least 1 representative. Yes. If the disparity between the population of the most and least populous state continues to grow, the disproportionality of the U.S. House of Representatives will continue to increase unless the body, whose size has been fixed at 435 since 1929, except for brief periods, is expanded. So you might think that whatever state you live in, however many representatives you have, is based on your state's current population. No, it's actually, or it's based on technically the population of Wyoming, who then, whatever the proportion is, the number of people they have is assigned to 1 electoral vote, and that proportionality is used to assign the why do I keep saying that? Is used to assign the representatives in each state from there. It's actually not modern. It's not 2025's population that we're using. We're using the population of Wyoming in 1929 to assign representation in the House of Representatives. We're almost 100 years old here. And shouldn't it just be reflective of modern times? The Congress is currently in 2025, right? So why would we not use the population of 2025 to assign representation? Why are we using the 1929 population of Wyoming for assigning proportional representation? Do we see why that doesn't make sense? It's almost 100 years old. Why have we not updated this? A total of 543 seats would have been required to implement the Wyoming rule based on the 2010 U.S. Census. However, the decade leading up to the 2020 census saw Wyoming's population increase at a lower rate than that of the rest of the United States. As a result, the required House size to implement the Wyoming rule will increase to 574. So it's not even that much of an increase. If we actually implemented this rule, it would only go from 435 to 574. That's not even that crazy. But it would be more reflective of the current population numbers in the U.S. Under the Wyoming rule, California would gain the most seats with 17 more members than it would have after the next reapportionment. So California would gain 17 more seats. Okay. So with this chart, you can see how these states would change. So currently Alabama has 17 representatives in the House. With an updated Wyoming rule, they have 9. Let's do a blue state. California goes from 52 to 69. Delaware, 1 to 2. Let's find a red state. Nebraska, 3. Okay, 3 to 3, because their population hasn't changed all that much. Let's find another red state. Let's go to the great state of Texas. They'd go from 38 to 51. So, like, that's my thing, is like, blue and red states would get more representatives. But the thing is like, it's reflective of our increase in population. And also, like, if we have more people, it kind of makes sense we would have more people to represent us, right? Because we've grown in population since 1929. And possible effects. Okay, so while expanding the House would reduce the average disparity in district size, it would not necessarily reduce the disparity between the smallest and largest districts. After the 1990 United States Census, with a House size of 435, the largest district, Montana, had 803,655 residents, 76.3% larger than the smallest district, Wyoming, with 455,975 residents. The Wyoming rule would have given a House of 549 in 1990, and the former method of seat apportionment had been used. With that size, the largest district, North Dakota, would have had 4,141,364 residents, 91.8% larger than the smallest districts, Delaware's 2 districts, at 334,348 residents each, due to Delaware having enough population to be split in 2, but North Dakota falling just on the other side of the threshold. So it's like, I don't know, like what's really the takeaway from all of this? Like, it honestly is not even a super partisan effect, because every state sees an increase in representation. Also, recently there's been a lot of movement from the north to the south for housing is more affordable because there's job opportunities, etc. Like, it's not really a partisan thing to enact the Wyoming rule, but it would make our representation in the House more proportional to our current representation, instead of the representation in 1929. Again, I just want to emphasize, 1929 should not affect us today. So here's one other website that I just want to talk about. I think we already talked about the background of this, right? So, in the 2020 Census Bureau found that the total resident population of the United States stood at 333,499,281, while the total resident population of Wyoming, the smallest state, was 576,851. Applying the Wyoming rule would yield a total house size of 574.58 seats. I don't know what 0.58. I guess we have to round up to 575. Oh, perfect. We will round up to 575 for the purpose of this analysis. Utilizing the apportionment, population would allocate 573.13 seats. So you can see this is the map in 2020 if we had the Wyoming rule. And here's a list of how various states would be affected. Look at this if you want, but I think you get the idea. Electoral college impact. A post-2020 apportionment using the Wyoming rule would have made a negligible impact on the Electoral College. Under the current apportionment, President Trump carried 31 states, and with them, 312 Electoral College votes, about 58% of the Electoral College. Kamala Harris won 19 states and the District of Columbia for 226 Electoral College votes, 42%. President Trump would have won 395 Electoral College votes, 58%, under a Wyoming rule apportionment. to Kamala Harris's 283, 42%. So what this is saying, right now under the 1929 rule, Trump would have had 312 votes. Kamala Harris would have had 226 electoral votes. If we updated the rule with the 2020 assignment, Trump would get 319 instead of 312, and Harris would have gotten 285 instead of 226. And actually, when you look at the percentage of it, Trump goes from 58% to about 58%. Harris goes from 42% to about 42%. So it's not like it would have made too much of a difference, right? And that's my point, is like, maybe it doesn't make a huge difference, but like I do believe this is the right thing to do, because why should we base our basis for representation on the electoral, why should our electoral college votes and the votes in our House of Representatives be based on 1929's population in Wyoming? Literally, the 1929 population in Wyoming is how we assign electoral college votes and House seats. I don't know. It's something to be updated, but you know what? It's also a bipartisan thing that could be updated. So that's my takeaway of this video. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact allows us to... Hang on. Last scroll, yep. It allows us to have a popular vote while bypassing the Electoral College without having to reform the Constitution, right? It allows us to still use the Electoral College, but assign those votes to whoever wins the national popular vote. And the Wyoming rule just allows us to update our representatives in the House of Representatives, as well as our Electoral College based on the current population, rather than the population of Wyoming in 1929. And I think that makes a lot of sense.